And so many children out there remember a past life. There's so many stories and different things where children talk about their past life, and by the time they reach 7 or 8, those memories start fading.
Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio and streaming on Facebook Live. We are around the world, and we are very happy that you are here joining us today. We have got a wonderful guest joining us in just a few moments. We're going to be speaking with Betsey Lewis, who is a very good friend of ours and has been on the show many a time. So lots of things going on. I just wanted to also mention, I completely forgot. I was looking through our archives because I like to post some old stuff from back in the old Blog Talk Radio days. And I went looking back, and I'm like, I wonder when we first started doing the show. When did I start doing radio? And I went back to our first broadcast, and it was on March, I believe I said March 12th, 2008. So we celebrated 10, or I celebrated 10 years on the air, and I didn't even realize it. I made a joke about it. I'm not good with anniversaries or birthdays, but anyway, so 10 years, still on the air. I can't believe it. And hopefully another 20, 30 more years to go with very interesting guests and wonderful information to share with all of you. Anyway, I just want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us here on the Just Bernard Show. We are going to be speaking with Betsey Lewis. And let me tell you a little bit about Betsey. Betsey, of course, has been on the show several times. She's a good friend of the show, a friend of mine, and is an author of many different books. She just put out another great book. For those of you that don't know, she is an author and Earth Mysteries investigator. She's a gifted international psychic, considered one of the best in her field. Her first paranormal event took place with her parents at the age of 8 months old. At the age of 3, she began communicating with her spirit guides. At age 7, she began receiving frightening dreams and premonitions of disastrous earth changes now taking place worldwide. And for the past 40 years, Betsey has investigated aliens, UFO sightings, ancient archaeological sites, has conducted field investigations into the bizarre cattle mutilations throughout the Northwest, and other paranormal mysteries. She has been a frequent guest here on the Just Bernard Show, as well as on Coast to Coast with George Norrie and Ground Zero. She's appeared on Fade to Black, The Jim Rivas Show, Paranormal Central, the Dr. Rita Louise Show, and many other popular shows. And she has written, as of now, 11 books on these particular topics. And her new book, called Deja Vu, Past Lives of Famous People, just was released and is available on Amazon. So without further ado, let me welcome my friend, Betsey Lewis. Welcome back to the show. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you, Bernard. Great to be back on your show again. It's such a great honor to be on your show. I really enjoy talking to you.
And we really enjoy talking to you. Thank you. And thank you for always thinking of me when you're getting ready to put out a new book.
Oh, yes.
I
do.
it.
Well, you're one of the best. And like you said, you've been around 10 years. And I think that's awesome. So many shows come and go, and you've hung in there all these years.
Yeah,
so congratulations.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Betsey. I really appreciate that. So, Betsey, tell us a little bit about this particular subject matter. What was it? What is it about deja vu that piqued your interest? What motivated you to write a book on it.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe for those who don't know what deja vu is,
yes.
it's a feeling or a sensation that something you just experienced or felt happened before. It could be meeting a stranger for the first time and you just have this feeling you know them, or visiting a city or a place that seems so familiar. Or it could be something you said or did at the moment, and it feels like you've already experienced it. And so I feel that that has to do sometimes with past lives, not always, but I think it does. That we get this feeling, we just kind of jump back into time for a split second. And a lot of people get it. You've probably had it many times, haven't you?
Way too many times.
Right, yeah. I've always believed in reincarnation. Even when I was little, I didn't know what it was. I felt that I was in the wrong body, that I'd been in a different body, which is very strange for a little girl to feel. And I felt sometimes my parents weren't really my parents. And, I just had a feeling I didn't belong. And I think a lot of people feel that. You can't really explain it. And years later, my mother told me about reincarnation, how she believed in it, and she recalled a past life in China, ancient China. And what's really interesting about her story is she was an old man helping build the Great Wall of China. She recalled the opium vials that kept them going. She remembered actually dying there, and they actually buried her inside the Great Wall. Now, when she told me this is like the early 60s, and there was nothing in any books that said anything about anybody being buried inside the Great Wall. And in the past, 5 years or something with the internet, I started researching it, and sure enough, they did bury a lot of the workers inside the wall.
Oh, wow.
Which was stunning for me because she didn't know that. She had no record of that. Now, she didn't remember any of the other details of the story, and that was one of the the clearest past life that she remembered. I think she had other lives, but that's the one I remembered her talking about.
Oh, that's pretty interesting and very fascinating. I've got to say, and I won't go into my my anecdotes, at least not yet, but I've had many awakenings and many memories of past lives. I have some very interesting ones, and maybe I'll share a little bit later. But I back to the topic of deja vu. Do you know if anybody's done any type of investigation other than paranormal investigation? Have we done any physiological investigation into it? For me, I look at deja vu like perhaps, I don't know if it's kind of like a time slip. It could be a time slip.
Yes.
Or it could be me remembering to remember. Like, oh, okay. I had this intuition years ago, and now I'm remembering that I had this particular moment came to me years ago, and I'm just now living it. Or is it again like it could be an intuitive thought from a past life? Who knows? But
right.
I mean, it's just so interesting to me as far as what the whole essence of what deja vu is.
Well, there are theories that we actually jump ahead in the future for a split second. That they say that what our eyes see are actually we're seeing something in the past, actually, before our mind catches up with what we see. But that wouldn't explain everything, maybe smells or things like that. So maybe we do, for a split second, jump into the future.
Yeah, I wonder. I really wonder.
Mm-hmm. And I believe what you were all saying. So maybe it's all of those different things. It's all combined.
Yeah, and just put under an umbrella term, absolutely. So what was it about the concept of deja vu and looking into the past lives of famous people that motivated you to put it all together into one book?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I was just fascinated. I watched the movie Patton. And after watching about General Patton during World War II, the movie came out in 1970 with George C. Scott. Did you see that movie?
When I was a kid, I don't remember much about it.
Okay. Yeah. And he believed in reincarnation. So, and I don't think a lot of people knew about him. He was quite a character, but he believed he had at least 7 lives. But it showed him in the movie. He would be standing somewhere in a European place, and there was nothing around. And he would tell his, men that, this is where I died, on this battlefield. There was an ancient battlefield here, Roman or whatever, but he recalled it, and he believed in reincarnation so strongly. He believed that he came back to actually win World War II. He feels that is his whole mission, to come back. And he's been, he described so many different people that he was, let's see, it sounded like he was a mammoth hunter at one time. He was a Viking warrior. He was a soldier of Alexander the Great. He was a Roman legionary under Julius Caesar, an English knight, and even during Napoleon time. So it's pretty interesting. So, I have read other stories too, there was a story of Jack London, a book that excuse me, many people don't know about. It's called The Star Rover, and it was a fictional book, but it was it was written about a true story of the outlaw Ed Morrell. And what he was a horrible outlaw during the time, and he was put into San Quentin and actually tortured. And he learned how to astral project into his past lives. And he also wrote a book about his story after he was finally released from San Quentin. But how many people know about Jack London's Star Rover?
Yeah, no, I don't think I've heard of that. That's wonderful.
So I wanted people to be aware that there's been a lot of famous people that believed in reincarnation and how they recalled those past lives and how it really shaped their lives. I thought that was important.
Right. It is important for people to know that they're not the only ones going through it. I firmly believe that, especially in this day and age where, we're taught to be ashamed of anything out of the norm. So, for you to put a collection of stories of historical people who have recalled their past lives or have had experiences with deja vu is very helpful to those of us. So, as far as some of the people that you write about in your book, I believe there's a story about Napoleon when he first visited Egypt. What happened there in 1798?
I love that story because few people know about Napoleon. Here was this incredible man, this soldier. He was conquering all of Europe, and that was in the 19th century. And he went to Egypt. He was fascinated with Egypt, and he decided to spend the night one night in the Great Pyramid. And the next morning, this was in 1798, and the next morning he came out of the pyramid, and his soldiers said he looked white, like he had seen a ghost. And he wouldn't talk about it. He wouldn't tell them what happened in there. But on his deathbed, his best friend was there, and he said, well, what did you see in the pyramid? And he said, if I told you, you wouldn't believe it. And that was his last words before he died. So we don't know what happened, but it must have been pretty profound, whatever it was. It could have been, maybe he saw the future, maybe he saw a ghost in there, or, there's just so many things. But I'll tell you, I have some friends that actually went to the Great Pyramid and stayed inside. Somehow they got inside. This was during the early 1980s.
Right.
And Bill and his friends spent the night in there, and they said that they went into the king's chamber, and there were these glowing red orbs that stopped them in their tracks.
Oh, wow.
which was, yeah. And they said several prayers and said that they weren't there to harm anything. And then a huge blue orb appeared at the king's doorway and morphed into a very tall, faceless human. And Bill said that he felt the red orbs were like guard dogs, and he said it was amazing. And after a few minutes, everything just disappeared. But he said it was just a life-changing event.
I would think anything like that would be life-changing, especially at the
Yeah.
Great Pyramid. How profound is that?
I know. I would love to spend the night there. I know it'd be a little spooky, but
I wonder if any of our friends at the Kemetic School have been able to spend the night inside. How interesting would that be? So, Betsey, what about you? Have you experienced any past life experiences, or do you have any deja vu experiences that pop out at you?
I do. I've always felt that I had some connection to Mark Twain, the author, and I don't know what it is, but I felt certain things about him, and when I'd read certain things about him, I would just absolutely weep. I mean, I couldn't stop the tears. And I knew that he was interested in science. He was actually a friend of Tesla's, Nikola Tesla. Mm-hmm. But there were some books that he wrote that kind of was like time travel about heaven, hell, number 44, The Mysterious Stranger. And, you know, it's really a strange story that he wrote. But I don't know. I just felt that I knew him. And then one time I was up in the mountains and I had this vision that I was going across the country in a covered wagon. And there was an attack on the wagons by Indians, Native Americans. And I don't know what happened after that. It felt like, you know, we were attacked. I felt I survived. I might have been hit by an arrow, but I think I survived. But, and I feel that I was part of Egypt because I'm just fascinated with Egypt and maybe Atlantis too. I have a feeling you were part of all that too.
I have memories. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a.
Yeah.
Actually, you're making me think of it right now, so I'll share it ever so quickly.
Please.
First of all, I have a modern version, and I've told the story a few times, where I was a small child, about 6 years old, and I was in the backyard digging a hole. I ended up digging it like 6 feet, 7 feet deep. I was almost getting ready to hit water in South Florida. And, and my father runs out there, and he's like, "What are you doing? Why are you digging this hole?" And I was like, "I'm looking for Isis." And here I was like 4 or 5 years old. And
Really?
he
Oh,
told
my
me that
God.
story after I got involved in the occult and whatnot. He's like, "You know, when you were a little kid, you were digging a hole and you were looking for Isis." I was like, "Really?" Very interesting.
Now, where did you get the name? Where did you hear the name?
I have no idea. I was always very fascinated with Egypt. I mean, it might have been, there was a TV show, maybe, I guess. I don't know. But I've always been fascinated with Isis, and actually that was the mystical path that I took. The magical arts that I studied was under the Temple of Isis and the Egyptian and Kemetic tradition, so I've always been attracted to that. But I also had a very clear past life experience where I was, I could tell I was like in a desert. It had to be several thousand years ago, and there was me and a small boy, and we were in the middle of the desert, or what looked like a desert town, oasis, whatever you want to call it, a little encampment village, I don't know what to call it. And we were behind this like stone structure. And I remember we were throwing rocks at this old lady, and I know it's mean, but that was what little kids do, I guess. And we were being rambunctious little kids, and we're throwing little rocks and hiding, and throwing rocks and hiding around the corner of the structure, whatever it was. But I could see the clothes I was wearing. I was wearing like I don't want to say a turban, but like some kind of head wrap or something like that. And I couldn't have been more than like 4 or 5 years old. I mean. But that was one of the very interesting memories. I have I'll save it for later, but I have a very interesting one with my my former husband, a past life.
Oh, wow.
We both remembered a past life of both of us in ancient Egypt. Very
Oh,
interesting. I
wow.
was like, I think we played out our karma. Thank you.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, and you know what's interesting, you're talking about remembering things as a child, and so many children out there remember a past life. There's so many stories and different things where children talk about their past life, and by the time they reach 7 or 8, those memories start fading. But I talk about one of the children in the story that James Leninger, who his parents wrote about his story, became a very famous story, and he was on a lot of talk shows and everything. But at a very young age, he was around 3 years old, he started having nightmares, and he'd wake up screaming, and his parents thought, what is wrong with this child? What's going on? And then I guess it first started when he was 18 months, actually, and the nightmares, and he was screaming, airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out. Now, what would you think if you heard that? So it kept going on, and as he got a little bit older, he started telling them that he was James the Third. Well, he wasn't James the Third, and he started giving him, his parents' names. He said that he was shot down during World War II, and he was killed in a plane. He was a pilot. His name was James Houston, and this is one of the strangest stories because he gave details, exact details. And some of the men that he served with as James Houston were still alive, and he got to meet them, and they said that what he said about what happened and described everything, it was just uncanny. It was just so accurate. It just blew them away. So that's a story that, is pretty incredible.
Yeah, do you cover that in the book a little bit so people
Yes,
can dig into that? Oh, good.
I do. Yeah, that's in the book too.
Yeah, I think I heard a little bit about that one, but I'm not sure how much I remember of that. But you're right; it's very fascinating how many children, they have clarity to their past lives. It seems
they do,
and how quickly we're told not to remember or not to take it seriously. There's always and I know this is such a common anecdote about the child who's the mother walks into the room and sees the child hanging over the crib and asking the child, do you remember what God looks like? We hear that so much, and I'm sure that there's something to that, within our culture. But very, very fascinating. We have about 2 more minutes, but I want, before the break, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Om Seti, and we'll go into that, because I find that very fascinating. I don't know much about the story, so I'd love to hear exactly who this person was and what they were doing.
Okay, well, I'll just start it real fast. Om Seti was told about in a book by Jonathan Cott in 1987. It was published, called The Search For Seti. And her real name was Dorothy Eady, and she was born in the UK in 1904. And she later became known as Seti, which means Mother of Seti.
Right.
And she recalled a past life over 3,000 years ago, where she was a high priestess and fell in love with Pharaoh Seti I, the 19th century dynasty pharaoh, and the father of Ramesses the Great. So, it's an incredible story. Do I have a few more minutes there?
Yeah, about another minute, yep.
Okay. By the time she was 3, she was a normal child, but when she turned 3, she fell down a flight of stairs, and she was pronounced dead by the family physician. And that's when things started to change. She was like a totally different child, and her parents thought she was so weird. She would say that they weren't her parents, and UK wasn't her home. So
wow.
We'll go on from there.
Yeah, we're at the break, and we'll be right back after this break, everyone. You're listening to the Just Bernard Show on Revolution Radio. We'll be right back. So let's get back to our story of Om Seti, which I find very fascinating, and actually I have one after that too. So go ahead, Betsey. Tell us a little bit more about Om Seti.
Okay. So after she had this near-death experience, she changed. And she just started talking different. She was telling her parents they weren't her parents and this wasn't her home, and they kept asking her, well, where is your home? And they just thought it was a child's game, right? And then her father brought home a book, an encyclopedia, and he had it open, and he was looking at Egypt, and she looked at it, and she looked at the photos, and she said, this is home. And which is very strange for a child. And then later, when she was a little bit older, they took her to the Museum of Antiquities in London. And they went into the Egyptian part, and she ran right up to the mummy of Seti I and refused to leave him. In fact, they had to pull her away, kicking and screaming. There was something about it, but she continued to be in, I guess, the UK for a while, but she was kind of tutored by one of the Egyptologists at the Museum of Antiquities and learned hieroglyphs. She picked it up so quickly, and it was really incredible. And then later she went to Cairo. She married an Egyptian man, and they had a child. She felt that she wasn't a very good mother, and they kind of both went their separate ways, and the child went to stay with the husband. And then she started having these weird things happen. She saw the ghost of Seti. He came to her. The first time was actually when she was 14. She saw him as a mummy, which really scared her when he was kind of hovering over her bed one night. And then pretty soon she started seeing him again all the time, but in his real, how he looked 3,000 years ago.
Right.
And he would come to her and talk to her as a physical being, I guess. And he started telling her that what happened and how he knew her from 3,000 years ago, that she was a high priestess. She was around 14 years old, and she met Seti, the pharaoh, when he was visiting the temple, I guess, at that time. And they fell in love, and they had an affair, and she ended up getting pregnant. So that was a big no-no for a virgin priestess.
Yeah.
And he had to leave somewhere. There was some big war going on in Nubia, and she was confronted by the high priest, and he wanted to know who was the father. And she didn't want to tell him, but she finally revealed it. It was Seti, and she knew how horrible this would be, the disgrace on the pharaoh, and what would happen to her. So she actually committed suicide.
Oh my.
Yeah. And what happened after that, Seti died when he was around, well, he met her in his 50s, but he died, they say, around 55. And after his death, he searched the whole universe looking for her. He was so in love with her as the priestess, and he couldn't find her anywhere. And he went to the council in Amenti, which is kind of the afterlife for Egyptians, I guess.
Yeah.
And the council are these spiritual high beings, and they said, she's not here. We don't know where she is. And then when she was born, he found her again, and he started watching over her and everything, but he would come to her. And I guess when she was still married at the time in Cairo, a woman that was taking care of the house, one night she saw a man standing over Seti, and the next morning she said, "Oh, I see your husband came back from wherever." And she said, "No, my husband isn't here." So it was Seti. Yeah. So she learned how to astral project with him, and he told her many, many things about his travels to other worlds, just incredible things about the tomb, and about Abydos and the Osirian temple, and just amazing things. But I'll let you tell your story, and then I'll tell you one of the things that he talked about, another world, because I see that, was that you asked about past lives on other planets?
Yeah, Treva posted
Treva
that, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we'll get into that, but go ahead and tell your story.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, all right. Well, first of all, let me say I've never shared this publicly, so this is going to be the first time I'm sharing this story publicly. Only my close friends know this.
Oh, wow.
But it's very interesting because I've been involved in, magic, the occult, and mysticism and whatnot for most of my life. And throughout most of my life, many of the, for lack of a better term, high priestesses and people that, older than me, I was in my late teens, early 20s when I got involved, and they had always said, "Oh, you were a great priestess," and I'm like, "Oh, please don't give me that BS, whatever." And it wasn't until I discovered, quote unquote, my astral temple. For those of us that do a lot of out of body work, your astral temple is a place out of this realm where you go to meditate, and actually you meet with other spirit guides and whatnot. And I have this astral temple, and it's very Egyptian. And it was very interesting. I was doing a meditation with one gentleman, someone who I dated for a little while, and he described the temple to me perfectly. And he was in like a trance state, and he was telling me, "I see you there. You're there. You're the priestess. You're one of the priestesses of the temple." And he's describing it perfectly. That I'm trying to visualize it in my head. So if those of you who see me close my eyes, that's why I'm closing my eyes. There were two chambers, one to the left and one to the right, and the priestesses stayed to the right. And it was underneath the altar area. It was in the back of the temple, for lack of a better term. And he said, "I see you down there with the rest of the priestesses." And I'm like, okay. I was like, okay, thank you for the confirmation. Well, several years later, I met who was to become my one and only real husband in this lifetime. We were married for 10 years. And during our courtship, for lack of a better term, his family was very involved in mysticism, and so was he. And again, we were doing some trance work, and he described the temple to me perfectly. And he said that he recognized me, that we were lovers, that this and that. But then he said, "We have work to do," and it got a little scary because he goes, "I was the one who destroyed your temple." And I was like, "What?" He goes, I see myself. He goes, "Me and the conquerors came. We destroyed your temple." He goes, we had a forbidden love. We had a forbidden love, but because of the army I was with, I had to come and destroy your temple." I'm like, "Oh, you were part of the patriarchy, weren't you?" So it was just so fascinating. And we had a very tumultuous 10-year relationship. It was very passionate, but a lot of, emotional screaming and, very tumultuous relationship. And it was finally near the end of the relationship, when everything was very peaceful, that we both kind of felt like, okay, well, I think we did what we were supposed to do. And we kind of just parted ways. And it was like, okay, I'm done. It's like, yeah, I'm done too. And, it wasn't that easy. I'm simplifying it. But it was like almost like, okay, it's time for this to end. And we have never spoken since. But it was a very, very clear, that, like I said, the images of seeing the warriors come and attack the temple was very traumatizing to actually relive that.
Isn't that interesting? Wow. I believe that, people come into our lives for a reason. We're like ships passing in the night, but we learn lessons from these people that come into our lives.
Oh.
And you had a very profound lesson in that relationship. It was amazing. So
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
cool.
Now I know why I really don't like the patriarchy at all.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Yeah. Wow.
So,
how interesting.
Treva, you asked about past lives on a different planet. Betsey, do you have any thoughts on that, or have you heard anything?
I do believe that. I don't think we're just, relegated to this planet for spiritual lessons. I think we can experience them on different levels. also on other planets, other worlds. And I think that maybe we've been aliens, what we call aliens out
Right.
there. You know, many of us probably have in past lives. I think we can have many different, you know, I think it's fun. I think reincarnation is because souls get a little bored out there. I think we need to be actors on a stage. You know, we get to change bodies all the time. We can be men, we can be women, we can, you know, just come in as different nationalities and
Yeah.
just think,
Different
you know,
forms, absolutely.
yeah, and just think if we stayed the same old, how boring would that be? So, yeah, I think that's one reason. It's also to evolve too. Supposedly, we're evolving to the Christ consciousness, and
Yeah.
even Jesus had past lives. But I believe that, you know, planets, yeah, supposedly. But I'll tell you the story that Seti told Seti, that when he was doing his astral traveling to distant worlds, he saw tall buildings on this incredible world, he said, and there were large blocks of red stone with glittering particles, he described it as. There were white streets paved in shiny blue metal, and in the streets lay long metal things with windows and seats inside, but they had no wings or wheels, he said. Inside were dead people who looked like us, men, women, and children. They had not decayed like, you know, but they were more like a mummy, he said. None of the people had hair on their heads or their bodies or faces. He saw a large open space where the metal birds would alight. You know, I guess they were flying machines.
Yeah.
And the dead people there also, he thought they had died suddenly by some horrible event. They wore long coverings from their legs and short tunics made of strange material, not woven, soft and pliable, he said. There was no air, there was no wind, there was no water, and outside the city were vast fields of cultivated plants, all standing dry and motionless. There were dead trees with leaves that still remained intact, and there was no breeze, of course, and there were strange animals, and one still had a mouthful of plants partly in its mouth.
Oh, wow.
Which it sounds kind of like the mammoths on Earth that suddenly died, and that's what Seti thought. But Seti was so scared, he fled back to Amenti, which was back to Earth and, you know, the afterlife here, and the underworld. And the council summoned him and told him that man on Earth should never go to any other place. They told Seti that the stars are evil places, and their evil must never be allowed to contaminate the world of humans. And I thought, that sounds a little strange. We're already contaminated, aren't we?
Yeah, you can say that again, unfortunately.
But doesn't that sound like it might be Mars? You know, we've seen so many strange things on Mars, and I know I've remote viewed Mars, and I've seen huge structures that look like a civilization lived there. And I think, you know, NASA's covering it up. I really do.
Oh, I believe we were there before, absolutely. Or maybe it was a part of the Earth and it broke off millions of years ago. I really don't know what the story is, but something's there, and there's some reason why we're so fascinated by it, because we're called to it. Yeah, I couldn't help but think of that when you were speaking, actually, at the beginning. We were talking about that feeling of this isn't my body, or these aren't my parents, or this isn't my world. There's that book called Stranger in a Strange World, and if anybody hasn't read it, please read it. You will probably relate to it if you're relating to this discussion. And it's about an alien who comes to Earth and is adopted by a family, and he doesn't realize that he's an alien until later on. And he's like, he knows that something's not right, you know, and he's living on Earth as an Earthling, and he just knows something's not right. It's called Stranger in a Strange Land, and I think of that as a phenomenon for many of us, you know, especially when we're so clearly connected with our spiritual nature or our spiritual consciousness, and when we come to this human form and have to abide by society's norms and the weirdness, you know, that society has us do. It's like, this isn't my world. This is insane, you know.
It is. When did you write that?
Pardon?
When did you write that?
Oh, I didn't write. Somebody else wrote it. I forgot.
Oh, they wrote it.
Who the author is, but it's a very famous book. It's a very famous book. Yeah.
Oh, if you think of it, tell me. Let me know. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, I
it.
just saw somebody post something about it recently, which is what brought it back to my mind. Of course, synchronicity for this discussion, but I think I saw it like 2 or 3 days ago that someone had posted. But yeah, very, very interesting. And so I think we have time to talk about a few more of the stories in your book, which I'm very interested to hear about Jean Harlow and what was it that happened. I mean, because this is a part of American history with the Kennedys and whatnot.
Yes, it's also strange how I fell into meeting Jean Lawrence, who was an actress at the time. This is the early 80s, and I was working temporary. I was a temporary secretary at a talent agency on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. I was working for Marty Klein, the president of the talent agency, and they handled John Travolta and Steve Martin and a bunch of big people at the time. And there was another secretary there named Diane. And Diane found out, we went to lunch together all the time. She found out that I was related. My step-uncle was William Peter Blatty that wrote The Exorcist. And she says, I've got this story to tell you, incredible story. And she said, we need to make this out of a movie. And she said, maybe your uncle can help us. So she wanted me to meet Jean Lawrence. And so I went out to Studio City and I met her, and a lot of weird things started happening at her house. I don't know what was going on, but lights would turn off and on, they'd flicker. She said that she had poltergeist activity there, but Brad Steiger, who just recently passed, he was a very famous author and paranormal investigator. He just passed a few days ago, which is kind of strange. He regressed her to this past life through hypnosis. And she told more about that she was the actress Jean Harlow, the 1930s bombshell, 1930s platinum blonde actress who actually was involved with many famous people. She married an executive, Paul Byrne, who was very abusive to her, but her stepfather was involved in a lot of the mafia characters. I mean, big mafia people at the time. And supposedly her story is that she was invited to Joseph P. Kennedy's house somewhere on the East Coast at the time. This was probably around 1936. And she had known him because he was involved with the studios at one time, and also he was involved with just a lot of different things. So she was invited there. She woke up in the middle of the night. She was looking for her fur coat. She left it downstairs. So she went downstairs and all was quiet at first. And then she heard some men talking downstairs in a basement, and it was kind of dark in there, but she was curious and she started walking down there. And what she saw was so incredible, so frightening. She saw Joseph P. Kennedy standing by a famous person. I won't tell you who it is. You have to read the book. Okay. But she watched them assassinate this person. She was standing there, and he told her she'd have to pay the price. Now, she died at 26, and many people say it was uremic poisoning, which could have been. Now, Jean Lawrence, as Jean Harlow said that it might have been that she was actually killed. But the thing is, it's so incredible, that Joseph P. Kennedy, the father of John F. K., the president of the United States, and Bobby Kennedy, was involved with some really bad characters. He was involved with, what's his name? Now I went blank here. He was involved with Whitey Bulger, who is, interestingly, he's alive and in prison right now. He turns 89 on September 3rd. Oh, wow. And he was also involved with Sam Giancana, who was the head of the Chicago crime syndicate. So he was involved with these bad people. He was supposedly running guns through the church. There was amazing, horrible things that were going on. And, we investigated a lot of things. There were certain people alive at the time that knew Jean Harlow that actually confirmed a lot of the things that she did write about and said under hypnosis. So the story is pretty incredible. But it makes you wonder, maybe that's why there's the Kennedy curse. That
Joe was pretty rotten to the core, from what I understand, historically speaking.
Mm-hmm. And maybe Joseph P. Kennedy started it all, and started the Kennedy curse for what he did back then. So I'm not going to tell everybody what it is. You have to read the story, and you'll find out.
Very good. That's a good teaser. We got about 6 more minutes, and I wonder if I don't think I even knew this, about that you are related to the author of The Exorcist. Ooh, no wonder you do what you do. So,
oh no!
tell us about your step uncle, William Peter Blatty. Is that how you say Blatty?
Blatty.
Yeah. What was his experiences with reincarnation? And I wonder if that had anything to do with the book.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that Bill, my mother met his brother through a dating service in Los Angeles in 1970. His name was Maurice Blatty, and everybody called him Mo. So that's how I became related to William Peter Blatty, who passed away just, this past year, which is kind of interesting. A lot of people leaving us right now. But anyway, he talked about he had this St. Christopher medal that appeared out of nowhere when he was working on The Exorcist, and he felt it was his mother's. And then he was with some friends, and they watched this phone actually lift off the cradle by itself. He had things like this going on. And during the 1980s, he began experimenting with reel-to-reel tapes, which is electronic voice phenomena, EVP, right, and got some really spooky voices. When he asked questions, does God exist? And they could hear a male voice. And the second time he played it at a higher speed and heard the words, hope it. And then he heard the phrases, I know what you were thinking, and there's no space here, and make them pray, Bill, were some of the words that he was told.
Wow.
After playing, which is kind of spooky in itself. But he said that his 19-year-old son died suddenly in 2006, and the lights started coming off and on, turning off and on in his home. And an office lamp flared up and then turned off, he said. And even the lights in the chandelier faded back and forth. So he had a lot of interesting things happen. And even on the set of The Exorcist, there were stories of strange things going on. I think sometimes when you mess with things like that, maybe even write about them, you kind of bring in that element, don't you think, Bernard?
Oh, absolutely. There's got to be some energetic psychic link when you're well, I mean, you're channeling some type of information from somewhere, whether it's inspiration or the spirit world. So there's got to be some kind of portal opening up.
Right.
I think about, people, and I don't want to get too far off topic, but people talk about violent movies and violent video games and things like that. And for me, it's all energetic. So yeah, of course, I believe that if we're tapping into the world of, demonic possession, then maybe some things might come through, even if they're as simple as little sprite elementals to mess with you,
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
But,
yeah.
My goodness. Very, very interesting. So there are, it's more profound and more, how do I say, around, for lack of a better term, than people actually realize. How much of deja vu and past lives that people have admitted to, and have people share this information with other people. I'm sure Shirley MacLaine would have a lot to share with us. But
I wrote about her too.
Good. So. Okay. Very cool. Well, unfortunately, we've only got about 2 minutes left. So
no.
leave us with something exciting about past lives or deja vu, what would you want to tell everybody, whether it be about the topic of deja vu and past lives or about your book?
Well, I just want to tell them that there are some questions and answers back there. I answer a lot of questions that have been given to me by spirit guides, and actually a very famous psychic that also talked about the afterlife and, what happens to people that commit suicide. Do animals have souls? Is there a heaven and hell? And I'll say absolutely not, that we create that when we get on the other side because we're pure energy, and many, many things in there. So I add all that. I think there's just some incredible things for people that still have a lot of questions about why are we here? What are we doing here? What's it all about? So I think they'll find it really interesting, and how I believe that we're all evolving and where we stand. But there's one thing that does trouble me, and that's if we decide to reincarnate in the future, the way we're destroying the earth. Just think about this. We're going to be the ones reincarnating in the future if we destroy our planet. We better think about that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Betsey. And thank you, everyone, for watching. I love you. We will see you next week. Same place, same time here on Revolution Radio. Bye-bye.